109 players, 206 men and 103 women, are here for the 2023 Fide World Cup. It's the premier knockout tournament in over-the-board chess. All of these players have one goal: to become a candidate for the World Championship. Only 3 players in each tournament will earn this distinction. The winners will also earn a combined 160 grand in US dollars. Not bad. Both of the reigning World Cup winners are back to try and repeat as champion, a feat no one has ever achieved in this grueling tournament. They are Jan Krzysztof Duda and Alexandra Kosteniuk, the victors in 2021.
Alexandra Kosteniuk crushing everybody. She is your deserved champion.
And Jan Krzysztof Duda wins the 2021 Fide World Cup. What a performance.
The top seeds in 2023 are Magnus Carlsen and Zhu Wenjun. Neither of them have won a World Cup before. Yes, even Magnus has yet to make it past the semis. It's that tough of a tournament. Still, Carlsen is the favorite in pretty much any tournament he plays. But don't sleep on the rest of this field. Hikaru Nakamura, Fabiano Caruana, Jan Nepomniachtchi. They're all here to try and win their first World Cup. For its part, the women's field boasts 5 world champions. In addition to Zhu Wenjun and Kosteniuk, that list includes Tan Zhongyi, Maria Muzichuk, and Anna Ushenina. Will one of them take the next step in a return to the throne? In a knockout like this, it is truly anyone's game. Who will come out on top? Who else will qualify for the candidates? What upsets are in store? This is the 2023 Fide World Cup.
Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. This is the long-awaited tiebreaker of the third round here at the 2023 World Cup, and a look into the beautiful, spacious, expansive playing hall in Baku's hotel. Just an amazing chess city, an amazing tournament it has been thus far, and today promises to be a scintillating day of 19 rapid tiebreakers. We see some guy named Anish Giri adjusting his pieces there. Well, I, for one, cannot wait to delve into the action. It's been a pleasure commentating for you so far. I'm Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, and once again, in the studio, Grandmaster Peter Lecko, good afternoon to you. This is going to be all-out craziness in this tiebreaker round.
Yeah, hello Daniel, hello everyone. Definitely, we have seen the previous tiebreaks were incredible, and we have 19 tiebreak matches today in the men's section and 4 in the women's section. I believe I was promising to Tanya last time that we're gonna have 5 pairs going all the way to the Blitz playoff. What is your take on this?
I think that we're going to get at least 3. We have so many evenly matched pairs that there is no way that all 19 of these matches are decided in the first 2 mini matches. I definitely agree. I think a couple of these matches are going to go all the way to the Blitz, and if this is going to be anything like the round 2 tiebreaker round, then we are in for a wild ride. Now, folks, if you're just joining, let's quickly go over the format of the tiebreaker. The players start by contesting 2 rapid games with a rather generous time control of 25 plus 10. So this is not a day of exclusively blitz. If that first tiebreaker ends in a 1-1 tie, then they contest a second tiebreaker. The time control reduces to 10 minutes with, again, a 10-second increment per move, so still something between blitz and rapid. If that second tiebreaker is drawn, then we move into crazy territory. So if they once again go 1-1, then they play a third tiebreaker. Again, 2 games. This time the time control resembles blitz, 5 minutes with only a 3-second increment per move. And if that third tiebreaker is also drawn, yes, we will have that, and that is what we were talking about, then sudden death begins. Sudden death consists of 1 blitz game at a time with a time control of 3 plus 2, and as long as they keep drawing, they keep playing, Peter. It sounds far-fetched to have a blitz game, but once again, these players are so passionate. They go back and forth so many times that we are bound to have a couple of matches go all the way down to those sudden death games.
For sure, yeah, and the tension is growing with each new pair. It's also a very grueling format. It's very challenging on the players that they have to adjust to new time situation. I mean, for example, now from the classical, they moved to the rapid section with 25 minutes. This isn't the usual rapid that people are used to, which is usually 15 plus 10. Yeah, so it's a much slower pace, and one shouldn't rush. I mean, here you have time to take. To make sure that you get a good position. I mean, if you rush, you might end up with 23 minutes versus 17. What does it help you if you are pushed to the wall? I mean, no, you have to make sure that you have the position under control and play from strengths.
That's a great point. I would argue that particularly for the younger generation, 25 plus 10 is closer to classical chess than it is to blitz. Obviously, it's a rapid time control. You don't have too much time to ponder critical moments, but like you're saying, Peter, I mean, you have to take this and treat it like it's a classical game. You can play very high quality chess, even in a 10 plus 10 time control. Well, speaking of high quality chess, there was a lot of high quality chess yesterday, but there were also a couple of crazy topsy-turvy moments. I think the game in everyone's head is that Ju and June victory. But before that, we also had Fabiano Caruana dodge a major bullet against his Turkish opponent, Mustafa Yilmaz. And we'd like to recap the end of that game for those who might not have watched yesterday. If so, how dare you? Where have you been? But in case you're just joining us today, this was the critical moment from the Yilmaz Caruana game. Their first game was also drawn, and Caruana has just made a series of very inaccurate moves, culminating in rook d to c8. Yilmaz has a big initiative, Peter, and this is where the craziness started. A huge blunder. In a position where rook takes h6 would have granted a nearly winning position, Yilmaz literally hangs his f4 pawn.
Exactly. Yeah, we have witnessed some incredible drama here. Rook dg2, then after queen takes f4, which was the only move, but a very strong one. It looked like Fabiano is going to win this game. Then Mustafa's in a complete shock. He nevertheless uncorked the amazing rook g6 to e6, rook sacrifice. And yeah, what we have witnessed, please take over.
Yeah, so they reach this position, and the king is kind of caught in a box. You cannot go king h8 because you drop the queen. And Fabi, without thinking, he had about 5 minutes on his clock, acquiesced to the repetition of moves. The bishop keeps pursuing the king. But it turns out that with a better queen sacrifice, queen takes f5, Fabi could have attained a winning position. The point is that the light squared bishop opens up, and the knight is an insufficient defender and can be kicked away with rook e7. The dark squared bishop is also completely blunted by black's pawn. So the computer assessment here is about -2. Black has overwhelming compensation for the queen in the form of a rook, a piece, several pawns, and a devastating initiative after knight g6, rook e3. Also, Peter, you pointed out the role of the knight on h5. That is the defensive hero because it guards the g7 pawn and keeps white's piece tandem at bay. This would have likely won Fabi the game, but instead, he had enough of that topsy-turvy affair. He takes the draw, and instead, he will have to earn it today in the tiebreaker round where anything can happen.
Yeah, for sure. And we feel the tension. Look at this. Yilmaz, Mustafa, and Fabiano Caruana in a very tense moment. Like if this position is still in their heads, but they have to forget about it. They really have to forget about it.
And there we see Rauf Mamedov, who also held his own against Jan Nepomniachtchi from a position of strength. Jan, I wouldn't say lucky to get away with the draw yesterday, but definitely relieved. Let's put it that way, to be sitting here today. And the players looking off into the side. In the distance, we see Jules Moussard, the French grandmaster, who has a very difficult task of holding down Wesley So, one of the best tiebreaker and rapid players in the world. We are going to see some upsets today, inevitably, Peter. And if you're the lower rated player, for the most part, you've got to be happy as you're sitting here, because the shorter the time control, the greater the chance that something crazy happens.
Yes, but we have seen enough craziness yesterday already to know that the classical time control doesn't guarantee at all safety for anyone. This format, the World Cup, somehow makes the players so tensed, and we are about to witness the first moves.
We saw there Nijat Abasov, the local hero, who had a very even match against Anish Giri. He is in the foreground adjusting his pieces. He will have black in the first game, as will Fabiano Caruana, and the handshake occurs. Folks, we will go around the horn and try to bring you coverage from all of the top games. Of course, we can only watch one game at a time, but we will do our best to capture all of the action from the important boards as the players blitzing out. A Queen's Gambit declined with 4 Knight BD7, a rather fashionable line, Peter, that has been a frequent guest at the top level now for several years.
Yes, basically it automatically determines the Carlsbad structure after c takes d5, e takes d5, bishop g5, and probably that was the idea of Fabiano, that he wants to have a stable structure, because yesterday, and he goes for bishop b4, okay, so he transposes to Ragozin.
Yeah, we had a lot of transpositions there. First Queen's Gambit declined, then Carlsbad, now Ragozin, and forcing white to determine the placement of the bishop. This is a big moment because bishop takes f6 and bishop h4 are two diametrically opposed continuations, and Yilmaz goes for the more principled one. We're going to get a sharp battle here with a knight likely coming to e4, and it does.
Yes, this is a super sharp affair. I mean, one can see that Fabi wants to play energetic chess. I mean, he doesn't want to play some solid structure. Yeah, he wants to put the pressure on his opponent. Definitely, Mustafa couldn't have expected this line. This is a slightly forgotten kind of Ragozin line.
This was very popular around 2014. I was playing this with black, and it's important to play this move knight d2 because otherwise h5 would have posed major problems to this bishop. Now white can play h takes g3 and keep the integrity of his pawn structure. Now, I think we often see the bishop driving itself back to f8 and then refianchettoing itself on g7 in this line. That's basically all I remember, Peter, from my 7-year-old analysis.
Yeah, that's, I think, very much to the point. The big question also from white side, that do you play the standard e2, e3, or do you try to speculate to go long castle first and try to go e2, e4, very energetically opening up the center before black gets stable development? Because usually black wants to go bishop e6. If he's kicked away with a3, then of course bishop f8, bishop g7 comes immediately. Otherwise, maybe some queen e7 long castles would be typical. All eyes on Yilmaz, how he will handle this.
Super sharp position. Of course, he's got to decide whether he plays e3. He's got to decide whether he plays a3 and forces this bishop to move away from b4, because it is kind of applying some rather annoying pressure on the knight, which is also restricting in the future the mobility of white's queen. And indeed, a3 is played, and the bishop immediately drops back to f8. Fabi, of course, still well within his preparation. My guess, given Yilmaz's tendencies, is that he's going to go more positional with e3, Peter. That would be my prediction.
e3 and then bishop d3, try to get access to the light squares.
Yeah, and potentially you often see white putting that bishop on f5 and solidifying it with g4, if he wants to treat this positionally.
Yeah, well, I mean, basically, if he is not going long castle, then he will have to. Yeah, e3 is on the board.
And bishop e6 is likely from Fabi. You can also push the c-pawn up to c6. I don't think that c5 is common in this position. Black is a little bit too weak to be able to open up the center even further, but maybe Fabi has a more creative way of approaching this position. I don't know.
Yeah, well, also, basically, white can play the idea of going long castle positionally. So I mentioned long castle with e4 ideas, but there are also ideas like long castle, knight b3, and eventually putting that knight from d2 on c5, bishop d3, bishop f5. I mean, just combining all these ideas. It's not even clear how long that knight on b6 will stay there, yeah, because often the case that the knight landed there in order to free the way for the bishop. Yeah, once you play bishop e6, you get c6 in. The knight might return from b6 to d7 just to cover that c5 square.
Yeah, I almost think of these maneuvers as opening the door and then closing the door. You had to move the knight away, you bring out the bishop, but then the door closes once again because the knight's prospects on b6 are rather questionable. You're not exactly going knight c4 like ever, because that square is always going to be well protected, if not by the knight, which is likely to jump into b3, then definitely by the light squared bishop. Bishop e6 is on the board. Then we might see c6. So the character of the position, I think, has finally been determined. And I think we're going to get a strategic battle here, right? It's important not to be fooled by the fact that there's a pawn on g5. That doesn't mean that the game is going to be necessarily tactical. In fact, this is often a battle for control over key squares.
Exactly. And also in long terms, if, for example, both sides are ready to develop their pieces, black gets in like c6, queen e7, and long castle, one should not forget about black's h5, h4 plan. That is a very typical plan of advancing on the h file with the pawn and trying to create some targets in white's position after g takes h4, g takes h4, the pawn on g2 will be a bit vulnerable. These are long-term strategical ideas.
Your point is very well taken. Easy to assume that the only theater of action is the queen side, but no, there is stuff going on potentially on the king side, and maybe that's partially the reason why I see white rushing bishop f5 and then g4 to clamp down on the h5 square, and maybe far in the future white could shuttle this knight over to the king side, but we're speculating right now. Of course, white hasn't completed his development yet, and the next big question is whether white is going to castle queenside or implement some sort of less common plan, maybe that involves pushing the queenside pawns up. But then the big question is, what do you do with your king? Castling kingside in this position, Peter, I think is essentially out of the question because of this h5, h4 idea.
Exactly. I mean, black even does this if white goes long castle, but Mustafa goes rook b1, clear intention. He wants to go b4, but then why did he spend the tempo on rook b1? It's kind of mysterious.
Was he worried about a5? Well, not plausible because of b5. Huh.
Or even one could give an argument that after b4, a5, you could have still played rook b1 if you wanted. Yeah, it's a little bit surprising.
It's almost maybe doubles as a semi-waiting move. So maybe he doesn't want to play b4 against certain of Fabi's responses. I mean, if I had to follow my instinct, I would play bishop d6 here or bishop to g7. But rook b1 is almost a semi-waiting move, not determining the queenside structure. But I agree, a little bit strange, the order of operations here on the queenside.
At least because it also basically signals Fabiano knows exactly, aha, okay, so my opponent wants to go b4, and he might be ready for it. The big question, of course, that do you put that bishop on d6, which is very sympathetic. On the other hand, then of course your king will also, because white will play b4, b5, it means that black will not be able to castle long. So just as we speculated that where does white put the king, the same question applies to black. If you play bishop d6, try to be aggressive with h5, h4, then do you keep that king on e8 or do you play king f8, king g7, a typical kind of artificial castle maneuver as well?
Yeah, because you want to keep this rook on h8 to guard the h6 pawn and to make possible the h5, h4 pawn advance. So many decisions to be made here for both sides. A very strategically rich and sort of undefined position that we will keep a close eye on. But another game that we have to keep a close eye on, which is already exploding, is the Wesley So Jules Moussard tiebreak. I was expecting the classical portion of that match to be wild. It wasn't. It was fairly tame, but I think they're compensating with their first rapid game. So let's go to that game. Wesley has the white pieces in their first rapid game. And what on earth do we have? Wesley So played 1b3. I had to double check that Jules wasn't playing white, but no, he's not. It's Wesley who played the Nimzovich Larsen. And I think he's paying the price for that, Peter. I think he is regretting that already.
Definitely. I mean, first of all, I don't really understand why against exactly Jules Moussard you have to play something original like this, because Moussard is famous for being very creative, very aggressive. I wouldn't be daring to challenge him or to invite him for the initiative with black. He has sacrificed the pawn. He gets tremendous compensation. Black is going to castle long quickly. I mean, what is Wesley doing?
Man, this is very ugly. Look at those glaring weaknesses on the king side with queen to g3 being a possible idea. I want to rewind a little bit, Peter, because the opening went even further haywire after b3. Jules played e5. He played the traditional e5 and d5, one of the main lines, and he actually sacrifices the pawn on move 4. Wesley captures it. What does he get in return for the pawn? Two big things. The first is the bishop pair, and the second is a massive initiative. Wesley has to unfianchetto his bishop. He has to weaken his king side, and bang, d4, striking where it hurts in the center. Bishop comes out to d6, and a very weird decision by Wesley to play d3 that allows Jules to weaken his position even further. So I don't understand anything about the way Wesley is handling this opening.
Yeah, it just shows to me that he's extremely nervous. I mean, throughout the World Cup, we haven't really been seeing the Wesley that we know. I mean, he had been very shaky in his previous match. Also, so far, for example, this match against Moussard, he drew with black quite comfortably, and basically he has given up on the white color. He had made a 50-move draw or something yesterday. I was completely shocked. I was expecting that Wesley will play something like a D4, maybe some Catalan, solid stuff, and we'll try to squeeze the opponent. In fact, he went E4 and was completely neutralized in the Petrov. And now he's somehow panicking with this first move BC. That's my feeling. And I'm really worried for him.
And there might be cause for panic because Jules is likely to castle queenside. Why castle queenside? I think mainly in order to be able to attack White's king in the event that Wesley castles kingside. Because then you might want to blast open the kingside, almost like Caruana would with g5 and then h4, h3. And that bishop on g4 firmly ensconced on the best spot on the board. It's exerting massive pressure on White's position. Is there a case to be made, Peter, for playing queen d2 and castling queenside? Of course, I see that there's queen a3 and knight b4, but perhaps the knight on c3 can hold things together long enough for White to smoke that queen out of a3.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if White is able to play queen d2 and long castle, it's kind of good news. But the big question is, do we have the time to do that? I'm expecting black to castle long at this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, after queen d2, there is some incredible computer idea which would have not closed my mind at all. Queen f6.
Whoa.
Wow.
Castles, bishop b2, and there's a mate on a1. How often do you see this type of construction? I've never seen this idea before. And a checkmate. And if White takes with a queen, then obviously you pay the price for your first move. The knight on c3 is unprotected. And Peter, the pawn on h4 is a weakness, which is why rook f1 is impossible. You can see Wesley really paying the price for his very loose play in the opening. What an idea.
Yeah, it's stunning. And black's next move is rook h8. And, well, Jules is incredible aggressive player. He's enjoying this position. I also feel like he's best buddies with MVL, with Maxim Vachier-Lagrave, and all the anger that probably MVL encountered yesterday after being knocked out. I feel like all this anger turns into positive energy for Jules, and he's fighting for MVL as well in this World Cup.
Honestly, a terrible pairing to face Jules Moussard. Yeah, he's below 2,700, but he's such a dangerous player. And he's proven himself in the CCT qualifiers, in the CCT final. He is very capable of knocking out a top player, as he's already showing us in the early going today. Big moment, I think, after queen d2, whether he will spot this queen f6 idea, because if White is able to castle queenside, tuck the king away on b1, then White starts the long road to recovery. White can push e4, and let's not forget that White is up a pawn. So Jules cannot rest on his laurels here. He has to continue finding ways to make it difficult for White to untangle.
Yeah, and very, very tricky spot. Very tricky spot. He's also now my teammate in the German Bundesliga in Deitzau. And after three years, 2 months, I played 1-2 games there. And I did spend time with Jules, and I realized that he's not only a great player, he's an incredible person, very friendly, very energetic as well in life. And I feel like, all the discussion we had, if you give him this position, he's a monster.
He absolutely is. I feel very much the same way about him. I actually had lunch with him a couple of months ago, and we both ordered burgers, but they forgot to bring him his ketchup and Moussard. Okay, I didn't actually have lunch, but I really like Jules. That was a overly long setup for a very bad pun. But looks like Wesley is slowing down here, probably contemplating whether or not to play queen d2 or to castle kingside. I would rule out castles kingside on the basis of g5, and I wouldn't calculate a single move past that position. That just looks terrifying to me.
Yeah, I mean, basically the move you want to make is queen d2 because it gives you stability. However, sensing that Wesley is spending so much time by now, definitely has understood that there is this response queen d6 to f6, which is so annoying to face. And that's why he's taking his time. Is there some argument to try to play knight e4 and then try to get that knight to f2 and somehow dislocate that bishop from g4? But the e3 pawn that will be the problem. Yes, after knight e4, something like queen e7 or queen e5 happens, and we are already
Yeah.
dealing with some rook h8, f5 threats.
There's 4 separate weaknesses, right? E3, H4. There's dark square weaknesses on the queen side, and then there's the problem of your king. And white just doesn't have enough firepower to maintain all of those weak spots. I think Wesley has seen the move queen f6. This would explain the long time that he is spending on this critical moment. This is a game to keep an eye on. If Jules can win with black, he puts himself in excellent position to knock out one of the top seeds of this event. But we have plenty of other games to focus on, a lot of interesting unbalanced positions. We can go to our bird's eye view briefly and just update everybody on the state of our top games. Jan Nepomniachtchi, definitely someone that I'd also like to revisit. There's the bird's eye view. Yilmaz Caruana on the top left as Fabiano just developed his dark squared bishop. And Peter, I'll defer to you. Any games catching your eye?
Well, I mean, okay, let's go first to the Nepos game.
Let's do it. Mamedov
Because
has the white pieces.
I felt like I see two bishops, the pair of bishops for white. Okay, there is a monster knight on d5 compensating for it, but it does feel to me like white got something out of the opening.
Yeah, there's the bishop pair. There is a weak pawn on a5. This was an Alapin Sicilian, which is, of course, not the most common guest at the top level, but Ralph Mamedov is such a specialist in his e4 openings, which include the Italian, the Alapin, and he's just a hacker, right? You give him an unbalanced position, and he will punish you. Right now, the knight is hanging. Where is Jan going to tuck that knight away? Is he going to go knight b6? Is he going to go knight f6? Is he going to bring the other knight back in order to open up the diagonal for his bishop?
Exactly, because if the knight from d7 moves to f6, then white plays knight fc to e5 and gets access to the c6 square, yeah? And if black will have to give up his b7 bishop for the knight on c6, that will be very bad news. So I feel like knight 5 to f6, the monster knight opens itself for the bishop, and the long diagonal can give black the compensation.
Knight b6, knight 5 b6, tempting because it occurs with tempo. But white is not opposed to moving the queen either to f4, but probably even to g4, with massive threats of bishop c3 and bishop takes h6. So black definitely has to keep an eye, I think, on his king. The benefit of playing knight f6 is that bishop takes f3 exposes an attack on white's bishop. So I actually think that knight f6 is the much safer move.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that knight shouldn't go too far, and besides, the rook on b8 needs to be on an open file. I don't want to block it. The knight 5 f6 is the harmonious move that black's position actually requires, and maybe then more or less everything is fine.
Yeah, everything kind of well protected. You've got that rook on b8 exerting pressure on the queen side. And what is going to be white's response to knight 5 f6? Is it going to be knight d4, trying to insist on getting that knight to c6?
Yeah, knight d4 is a very tempting option, but yes, and knight 5 f6, I know, that's only, we are analyzing, yes, knight d4 is clearly the move, again eyeing towards the c6 square, and somehow queen d6 is the move that, you know, come to my mind, because somewhere some knight g4 ideas might also appear, pinning the knight and the bishop on d4 and d2, just a multi-purpose move.
Suddenly white is in some trouble here. Like white's minor pieces, none of them are defended by pawns, which is a major problem. If you try something neutral, then you lose a piece, knight b6, and you cannot keep this knight protected. So after queen d6, apparently the only move to keep the balance is knight b3, but this is a pretty undesirable move. If you have to move your knight back, well, black gets a tempo. He can use this tempo to generate threats against the pawn, and clearly Jan would be out of the woods if the game followed this course. So knight f6 poses a lot of practical problems. Maybe white should drop the bishop back to e2 and just get it out of b5, get it out of the x-ray of black's rook. I don't know.
Well, but actually white's last move was bishop e2 to b5, so it could be also some kind of a repetition of moves.
Yeah, oh, sorry, did not mean to go all the way to the start. Yeah, rook b8, rook e1, rook b8, and bishop b5, you're right. So knight f6, bishop e2, knight d5 would be a repetition.
Yes, then okay, one could argue that white does not necessarily have to play bishop b5. Bishop b5 first was a very nice move because it puts a lot of pressure on black, and black needs to find the move knight d5 to f6, otherwise it will be very uncomfortable.
Agreed. Big moment. Jan, of course, known for playing fast, but just like any top GM, he's good at sensing when precision is required, when the critical moment occurs. And I think it's very easy, Peter, to overcompensate in this time control because you've just played 2 games of classical. You're thinking of this as a rapid, and it's so easy just to assume that I don't have any time. I need to play quickly. I need to keep up the pace. You do have 6-7 minutes to spend on a critical moment, and I think that's very important. And Jan, good stuff from the world champion challenger. Knight f6 on the board.
Yeah, he is also famous for feeling the harmony of the pieces. Yeah, this is the main strength of Jan. He has some incredible feeling for harmony. He loves it. And I basically had no doubt that he will find the move. It was just taking him a little bit longer than usual, but it shows that this is a very important game.
Indeed it is, and an important decision for his opponent, Ralph Mamedov, who is currently not at the board. He's got to sit back down because his time is ticking, and he is down now to 18 minutes. I mean, as Ralph will return to his board and ponder his next move, perhaps we could go to the Giri Abasov match. They have a very unbalanced position in their first tiebreaker game. I'm going to flip that board on, and Anish Giri with the white pieces in what seems like an English. Material is not equal. White is up a pawn, but black's got the bishop pair and some queenside pressure. What do you make of this position?
Yeah, my feeling is that I almost like it more from the black side. Yeah, it's not only that we have the 2 pair of bishops, but if eventually the knight lands on c4, then there's a weakness on a3 and a big hole on e3 because the f2 pawn is missing from white's construction. I mean, to my eyes, it looks quite scary. Probably white has to find some nice stabilizing move. I don't believe that white can fight for an advantage anymore.
So let's forecast what would happen if white makes some sort of milquetoast move. Like, for example, let's say white plays queen d3. How could this go wrong for white? Well, probably black is going to grab on c3, and stop me if you disagree, Peter, but probably black will start by taking. Queen takes c3, you can put the other rook on c8, and let's say I go queen to d3. Do you put the knight on c4, or is bishop c4 a better idea to isolate this a3 pawn?
I will include bishop c4 because it's a very critical spot for white. Where do you put this queen? Yeah, the queen was ideally placed on d3. If you have to move to e3, I'm going to go back bishop f7 and get ready for knight c4 with a even nicer bishop on f7.
And now this move comes with tempo. It forks the queen and the pawn. And if white has to drop a knight back to d2, well, black doesn't have to rush. Black can play this very positionally, bishop f8 and queen d6. And eventually, white is very likely to lose that a3 pawn. And when he does, black will get a uncontested passer on the queen side. So Anish Giri trying to solve his problems tactically. He has just played the top engine move, which is d4, d5, sacking back the pawn in order to open the d file. What is going on here? Also, he's opening the d4 square, Peter. That might be an important detail.
Exactly. Before the problem was that the knight on f3 had nowhere to go, and if the knight does not move from f3, the bishop on g2 is kind of dead, and you want to open that piece up. Anish's d5, I think, was a very good practical choice. And after queen takes d5, he has knight d4. I don't know if you include rook takes c8 first or not, but definitely knight d4 feels like white should be able to get enough counterplay.
I think he should start with knight d4 because in the event of rook takes c3, well, knight takes f6 actually probably is not the move there because black gets too much stuff for the queen. Instead, white can recapture on c3, and obviously Abasov has to be very, very careful because knight takes c6 followed by bishop to d5 would pin the queen to the king. So Nijat might want to bring his king to h8. No, he does take on c3. Oh, queen takes d4.
Knight takes, exactly, queen takes d4, bishop c5 is the position away, but then the game will end probably in a draw.
Lovely transformation by Abasov, just forcing all the pieces off the board, and Anish can play e3, he can play queen takes c5, but I think we're with 95% certainty. I agree, Peter. I think I don't see either side winning this endgame.
Yeah, I feel that also Anish should be kind of relieved, because he had to find this very important move, d4, d5. Without that move, his position was really looking dangerous. And he probably got out prepared in this game. Looking at the clock situation, yeah, Abasov is way up on the clock. I believe that if this game ends in a draw, it's absolutely fine for Anish.
And both of his white games, Anish Giri has struggled. And even in the classical portion, there was a brief moment where one could argue that Abasov was much better, and Giri definitely was not drawing that from a position of strength. He was 2 pawns down in an opposite colored bishop endgame, and he had to eke out the draw. Kind of a similar vibe here, as Abasov will likely have the white pieces, and he's got to use white to try to put pressure. I think if you're the lower rated player and you draw the game with black, you really cannot just give the draw away with white in order to claim that, oh, I'm lasting longer against the top player. You have to try to exploit your opportunities.
Yeah, on the other hand, if you feel that you are completely secure and your opponent is not able to put any pressure on you when you are black, this gives you a lot of confidence. Yeah, then you feel like, okay, you know what, I don't need to be super aggressive. Let me try to play something where I don't have any risk and try to squeeze my opponent. I feel that Abasov is now in a very comfortable psychological situation.
Agreed completely. And Anish will continue pondering the best way to give his queen back. He just played the move e3 there. Abasov is going to trade on d4, and maybe black is even a smidge to be preferred here. That d4 pawn, probably more of a weakness than a strength, but all of that will be a moot point. The game very likely to end in a draw. Let's go back to our bird's eye view here briefly, just to apprise everyone of the developments in our top boards. Wesley So has managed to take the queens off the board. That's the top right of your screen. It feels like Wesley is out of the woods, much to the chagrin of French fans. But I don't know if we should go to that game or if something else catches your eye, Peter.
Yeah, well, that looks now quite stable. Yeah, I believe that there is no danger anymore on Wesley's shoulders. The match that we haven't covered was Jobava against Santos Latasa. I think maybe we should get an update there.
Absolutely. Both classical games there ended in draws. Santos Latasa, one of the top young players in Spain for a couple of years now. And Jobava has the white pieces in their first rapid game. The last move was c4. Looks like some sort of a Rue Lopez or an Italian structure, with white having assembled his heavy pieces on the king side. But is there anything going on the king side, or is white actually the one struggling to maintain the balance?
Yeah, I actually never really believe in any kingside attack without pieces, and look at this gorgeous queen on e6, protecting everything, protecting the e5 pawn, protecting the a6 pawn, stabilizing black's construction. Somewhere black might eventually have the f7, f5 move with very serious counterplay, and then one will start asking questions what this rook really does on g3. And I have to say that Santos Latasa is famous for someone who plays with incredible amount of confidence. He plays quickly. He is usually getting also extremely great experience in the Leon tournament, which I believe he has won, and also in Salamanca he has been doing well. So he's a great rapid specialist.
Yeah, and a habitual blitz player on chess.com as well. Of course, that comes in very handy the shorter the time control gets. Right now, he's got a question that he has to answer on the queen side. And to me, to my eyes, b takes a4 looks like the most natural move, because that earns you a long-term asset in the form of an outside pass pawn. And then maybe if white recaptures with the rook, you can set in motion your f pawn and try to wrest control of the initiative on the other side of the board.
Well, black has a very comfortable choice, and here comes the question: how much do you respect your opponent? Because the move b takes a4, rook a4, followed by f5 basically shows zero respect, and here you just signal to your opponent, I want to crush you. While you also have the other option of going b takes e4, knight takes e4, and e5, e4, just a very stable, nice move, which basically guarantees that you can never lose the game. Yeah, and then push e5, e4, and maybe you are a tiny bit better, and it's a very comfortable situation that, okay, no matter against who I play, I'm running no risk. So it's a big question of how Santos Latasa will deal with this situation.
Great call. He has indeed captured on c4, and e4 is not forced here, but it is the most reasonable move, and he's already made it on the board, trying to undermine and isolate the d3 pawn. What is black's next move? Well, it's likely, I think, to be e takes d3 and rook a d8 to pressure that pawn directly. We should also not forget about the jump of the knight to f5, which doesn't trap the rook, But after the rook moves up to g4, then the e3 pawn is going to be tender as well. So we could get some tactics in the center. And maybe it is worth for white to bring this queen from an attacking post on the king side to a more all-around post on the c5 square.
Yeah, or also try to change the queens with queen e5, but it might run into some trade and knight f5 and the pawn on e3 is hanging. It's a very awkward position, you know, and if I look at this position, and if you tell me Jobava is involved in this game, I would tell you definitely Temur is with the black pieces because it's a very solid construction. I just don't see him being on the white side here.
Man, we see quite a few of the top players really under the gun with both colors at the start of the game. Wesley So escaped his dubious position, but will Timur Radjabov escape his? He's down to 11 minutes on the clock, and he's got some unpleasant problems to solve. Speaking of unpleasant problems, we are also getting word that Andrei Yesipenko, in another match that we have not been covering, is crushing Paco Vallejo, the Spanish Grandmaster, with the black pieces without even a fight. So if we could quickly go to that game just to apprise everybody of what's going on the board there, Peter, it is looking awful for Paco Vallejo right out of the opening. There is the position.
Wow, I mean, okay, white is a piece up at the moment, but the bishop on c4 is falling. Besides, I'm not even sure that black is not able to make some more use of this situation. He's up on the clock as well. Bishop f7, total panic.
Complete self-destruction. Queen takes f7 is an elementary win with knight coming to d3, regardless of whether or not white moves the queen.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm completely stunned. Paco is losing his nerves.
This is winning.
Knight d3 check. Yeah, it can be game over.
Queen f2, king d1, bishop g4. I mean, this doesn't even need to be calculated. Knight c2 and bishop takes e2 poses an irresolvable problem. Knight e2 loses the queen. Queen e2 loses the knight. And white's king will be hunted down and executed in brutal, brutal fashion. And Yesipenko has already recaptured with the queen. Wow.
Of course. I mean, this is a golden opportunity for him. Such a close match, one would guess. Yeah, and I believe that the classical Persian saw quite very even games. And then suddenly, Vallejo is throwing away the white pieces. It might mean simply elimination.
Yeah. We're 14 moves into this game, and this might be one of the shortest decisive tiebreaker games that we have had in the World Cup thus far. Panic, I think, is the best characterization. You get off on the wrong foot, something goes wrong in the opening, and then you're just unable to keep your composure with your clock ticking down. This game is over. There is nothing left to see here. Yesipenko will see knight d3 check in a heartbeat.
Yeah, it's a complete massacre, and I don't see Paco coming back from this. I mean, this is such a shock, and losing like this with the white pieces, this is the biggest tragedy that can happen to you.
Incredible. Paco will have to win on demand with black. Very unlikely. Let's leave Paco to his own devices here and go back perhaps to the Fabiano Caruana affair, because that game continues to transform. It's a very rich positional battle, and I think Fabi might be going for checkmate here, since his opponent did something we considered unlikely at first. He castled kingside right into the teeth of the potential attack initiated by h5, h4.
Yeah, very strange. Yeah, now knights are traded on a4, and I mean, black has moves like queen g5 targeting that e5 pawn, also getting ready for the h5, h4 counterplay. And black is in a fantastic situation. White will have to push b4, b5 as quickly as possible, open up something on the queen side to make sure that you get enough counterplay before black really gets his attack going.
Yeah, b5 is almost a pre-move here, because that literally is the only lever that white can pull. Now, b5 could be met with c5, and then perhaps you could drive the pawn up to b6 and put pressure on the b7 pawn and play exclusively on the queen side. I would also consider playing rook fc1 at some point, because it does open up an escape route for white's king. If worse comes to worse and black opens up the h-file, at least the king will live to fight another day.
Yeah, kind of the king can run to e2. That's very nicely put. The big question is now black's next move, right? And Fabi goes h5 immediately. He wants to keep that queen on d8, making sure that whenever white goes b5, he has more control of the queen side.
So b5 will be met with c5, and I think Mustafa might just have to trust his intuition. He's down to 7 minutes to Fabi's 16. How is the game likely to unfold after b5, c5, b6 check? How is black going to deal with that check? Will he run to f8? Will he block it with his bishop? What do you think is the likely continuation there?
Well, I think that probably black will go king f8, but then white should maybe open up with f4 the position, because after f4, g takes f3, rook takes f3, you get some new dynamics that, yes, the pawn structure will be damaged completely, but we are trying to double with rook bf1 and bishop f5. If we ever trade that monster bishop on e6, which stabilizes, guards everything, and puts everything together, then we get access to black's king, and this could turn out to be very dangerous for black.
Very well said. For example, after queen g5, white doubles rooks on the f-file and can play bishop f5, but even more devastating here is bishop g6, and black will lose the f7 pawn, and with it, all of his king protection. So after f4, which I think is a lovely resource, black is posed with a rather uncomfortable dilemma. Right? How do you stop f5 followed by e6? And black is just not fast enough after h4. White plays f5. And after h takes g3, this is a crucial tactical detail. Not f takes e6 because of the classic mating pattern with rook h1, but rather the queen swings from one side to the other and protects the h4 square just in time. Black's attack evaporates, and white simply wins the game. So Mustafa, he has to go b5, but he's hesitating. Is he experiencing a little bit of panic in his own right?
Well, I think he has to go b5, and I'm not sure. I don't believe that Fabi gonna go c5, but he plays queen a7. I don't believe. This is too slow.
You think this is too slow? Because even after queen b7, he's not really posing any threats.
Yes, I mean, for example, I don't know, h4, queen takes b7, h takes g3, f takes g3. It's a very strange transformation, because we will get some queen g5 at some point. I don't know if I have to trade or... no, maybe it was important to go queen g5 first, not allowing rook takes f7 or whatever.
Oh,
Yes.
Keeping the f-file closed. Now, you're threatening hg and queen takes c3, so the most straightforward way to defend is the passive, very passive rook b1, but this looks awful for white. I mean, that pawn is collapsing, white's got no counterplay on the queen side, and the bishop on e6, a real hero, guarding the rook guards the pawn. The queen on b7 is stuck between a rock and a hard place. I'm with you, Peter. It feels like queen a7 is a step in the wrong direction.
Yes, it does not open up the position. It does not challenge black construction, yeah, because the pawn on b7 is the pawn which black can afford to give. It's much more important to break the construction on the king side with h4. Now the big question, of course, because so much nerves and so much tension is in play, is Fabi sacrificing the pawn, or will he think like, okay, I have a nice position, let me just maybe play a move like queen d8 to e7, protecting the b7 pawn. But knowing Fabi, he might feel and sense that this is a very important moment and try to grab that.
And he's already slowing down, so that signals to us that he feels that there are other candidate moves other than h4. And of course, the biggest one is indeed to play queen e7 and protect the pawn. And the castle and king side is not totally out of the question here. It's a pretty safe part of the board. So if Fabi gets cold feet about the move h4 and feels like his king safety is more important, then we might see him castling king side. And then once again, the game will transition to a more positional type of battle. Now, we're getting some crazy news from the chat, and I don't know if that news can be confirmed, but apparently Andrei Yesipenko threw. I don't really believe it looking at the board, so we'll revisit that game a little bit later. It still seems to me that Paco Vallejo is firmly losing the game.
And Fabi goes for h4, of course. I mean, this is the characteristic of a real champion. I mean, he senses that this is a very critical moment. No need to protect that b7. He has to try to win the match. And this is such a golden opportunity because he has stability. Yeah? He can play from strengths. And I'm really believing that Mustafa is in a lot of trouble.
And his clock situation probably influences Fabi's decision to go h4. There will be many tactical problems to solve in the next couple of moves, and he's only got 5 minutes to do it with. Okay, well, having said A, you have to say B. At this point, I think Mustafa has to grab this pawn and pray. Pray the black's attack is not going to crash through.
Well, I disagree. I believe that he will get cold feet because if things escalate on the king side, it's terrible. And you have a move like queen a7 to d4, bringing back that queen to some stability. I try to get queen f4. After h take g3, f take g3 is not the end of the board. So I somehow believe that if you get a panic and you think like, oh my god, my opponent wants to checkmate me, the move queen a7 to d4 is the way to try to stabilize.
That's a very interesting point. And somehow I feel like White's already signed a contract that I have to attack on the queen side. But no, you're right. I mean, the biggest weakness here at this moment isn't even the king. It's that e5 pawn. So the biggest problem is queen g5. And queen t4 would prepare to meet queen g5, potentially with queen f4, maybe also with something like rook f to c1. And then you could transition back to the idea of a pawn storm on the queen side with b4, b5. But 4 minutes on the clock, Mustafa is taking over a minute per move, and he's got to start blitzing.
Yeah, the position is very dangerous, and he feels the tension. Yeah, he knows that this is such a clear, because why did I play the move queen a7 if I can't take the pawn on b7? Yeah, but if you calculate the lines and after queen takes b7, you see that queen g5 appears on the board, and you are not having any threat on the queen side, and you are not able to open up, and your opponent is coming to you, then I simply don't believe that you can take the pawn.
3.5 minutes now. Mustafa is lost in thought here. You made a great point. I mean, I assumed that he was going to take on b7 immediately, but with every ticking second, the likelihood that he gets cold feet increases more and more. Fabi is up 10 minutes on the clock. That is a huge amount of time for a rapid game. We also have crazy developments in Peter Svidler's game against Jordan Van Forest. Shall we look at that one quickly and then maybe return to this one in a couple of moves?
Yes, I agree. Yeah, let's quickly check out.
Whoa. Okay, the queens have just gotten off the board. And it looks like a great endgame for Peter Svidler. Material is equal, but he's got the bishop pair. And strangely enough, his pieces are very well coordinated.
Yes, it's a lovely position. It's very much this Grunfeld style, you know, that, yes, the bishop on f8 is kind of dead at the moment, but the whole structure, the knight on f5, the light square bishop on d7, the potential b5, b4, kicking that knight away from c3. I mean, I really see Svidler winning this with black.
And everything is defended, right? The e7 pawn technically is a backward pawn, but it's protected by 3 different pieces. So Jordan doesn't have good employment to find for his rooks. The rook on d1 kind of stuck in no man's land. Yeah, he can play rook e1 and it looks nice, but what is the rook on e1 doing? Svidler could also deploy the bishop to h6, play rook c8, and I think his main plan should in fact be to quickly push that b pawn down the board and expose White's vulnerable knights on the c file.
Yeah, White goes to with a to a4. It was basically strictly the only move, and also maybe it gives White the chance to play knight c2 to a3, get some blockade on the queen side. Well, it's a slow affair. Black is clearly better with the 2 bishops, but I do believe that the more dramatic action is then with the Fabi game.
Yeah, let's go back. It clearly Peter is very much in the driver's seat, and we will keep an eye on this endgame. But since the queens got traded, the situation has stabilized. We go back to the Fabi game, and the situation becomes more dramatic. Fabi has just put the queen on h5. He finally has the doubled heavy piece construction on the h file. And let's not exaggerate, of course, he's not threatening checkmate here. H takes g3 can be met with f takes g3, and the white king has a much-needed escape square on f2. But still, this is highly, highly unpleasant.
Yes, but I'm very happy that Mustafa finally felt like, yes, I need stability. I have to bring that queen back, because with the queen on f4,
right.
now the situation looks much calmer than before.
And the problem isn't just that White's king is weak, it's also that his pawn structure is bad. White doesn't even have an extra pawn to suffer for. So it's not like Fabi has to rush with h takes g3 or h3. There's also a crazy idea, Peter, of pushing the pawn to d4 and deploying the bishop on d5, attacking g2, and maybe even in some circumstances pushing h3.
Yes, actually h3 maybe is not a serious threat, because h3, gh, queen takes h3 will be checkmate, otherwise you open up the... so maybe White has to move the rook from f1 to, I don't know, e1 or c1 or d1, and try to get bishop f1, protecting the g2 square.
But that's a very difficult idea to find on demand. Rook fe1, h3, bishop f1. Of course, black will not push the pawn to h2 and allow the king to seek shelter at h1. That would be the worst move in the position, except for queen takes c5, perhaps. But what will Mustafa do here? He's down to a minute on the clock, and I feel like he's just playing too slowly. I think that's going to kill him.
Yeah, the tension. I mean, already before the game, yeah, we looked at him and we could sense the tension, the nerves and everything. In this regard, probably Fabi has much more experience. Rook fd1 finally played.
Okay. Now, Fabi should also not sleep on the queen side. The rook from c8 can make its way to the second rank in order to try to hold down the white king. And rook a1 would enable black to trade rooks, and then h takes g3 would potentially win the rook in the corner. So Mustafa has to keep both rooks on the board here in order to take the sting out of h takes g3.
Yeah, but if you play rook a8, I really believe that I have to play rook a1. If a rook appears on a2, combined with all these h takes g3 things, it will lead to disaster. It will lead to mates. So the line, rook a8, rook a1, rook takes a1, rook takes a1, h takes g3, rook a8 check, trading that rook before it's kind of important, but you will have g takes f2 check intermezzo and you will win a pawn. After king d7, rook h8, and then we are pawn down. Maybe white has some chances to hold this endgame, but black is a pawn up.
Given the time situation, this would be very, very nasty for white. There were a couple of subtleties there. Of course, in this position, white cannot recapture on g3 because queen h1 check, as we were discussing, wins the rook. And after rook a8 check, black has to step onto d7. e7 is a mined square because queen f6 check would pick off the rook on h8. So both sides have to remain vigilant if, in fact, they go down this semi-forced line. But rook a8 is not forced, and Fabi can continue his attack several different ways. He can take on g3 first. Is there a case to be made for this brazen d4? I don't think so. I don't think it's worth seeking these complications and giving up a pawn when Fabi can play with relatively little risk.
Exactly, that's the key word.
Gone rook a8.
Yes, of course, this is the professional move. I mean, all these d5, d4 speculations are needed if you are in trouble, yeah, and you have to confuse the opponent. Here, Fabi has everything under control. Black is the one calling the shots. White is down to a minute and has to calculate now all these lines. Given the time situation, I feel like from the white side, you have to understand that black is way too active. I have to sacrifice that pawn. And yes, it's not a great endgame, but it's probably the best chance to try to hold this position.
Yeah, because white can go rook d2, but black's rook doesn't have to satisfy itself on a8. It can also jump into a3 and apply even more pressure on white's position, which is already on the verge of collapse. If Mustafa saves this, this will be even a bigger miracle than yesterday's game. He's down to 15 seconds. He might not even see rook a8 check, and he's gone rook d2. And the move rook a3 puts irresolvable pressure on white's position on both sides of the board here.
And look at this. Fabi is almost like instantly wanting to move rook a3 because he thinks like, come on, if I'm entering the rook with the rook and combining the set of h takes g3 and rook takes d3, queen h1 check, queen takes b1, then how is my opponent going to react with 20 seconds on the clock? It's almost impossible, even probably with a lot of time impossible to defend this position.
And I think here it makes sense to play fast. I love that Fabi is spending 30, 45 seconds per move. He's not moving instantly, but he's keeping the heat on white's clock because his moves are very little risk. He's not risking, he's not committing to anything by putting the rook on a3. And that's what makes it so debilitating, so demoralizing to play with white here. There's no end in sight. And Fabi is just going to continue pounding at it and creating threats until Mustafa collapses. Rook a3 is devastating.
Yeah, rook a3 devastating. By the way, I was thinking like how to continue if white puts the rook, for example, to e1, trying to be on a protected square after hg, fg, queen h1, king f2. But then there is this idea, rook takes d3, rook takes d3, h3, or first h3 and then rook takes d3, I mean, and opening up, avoiding bishop f1 defense.
Takes you h3. Just eliminate the defender and h3. And just to show for newer players what happens after gh, black plays queen takes h3 and queen h1 is completely unstoppable. If you don't play g takes h3, well, then black will take on g2 and white's heavy pieces are completely useless, all of them. You have to try rook a1 and now simply king d7, cold-blooded, stopping rook a8 and keeping the rook alive, and h takes g2 will cause white to resign. Okay, But Fabi holds himself back. He spent now 2 minutes in this position. Is there anything else that's attracting him here, causing him to pause longer than he was expecting?
No, I think he will have to find. Okay, hang on after rook a3. Can white play the move bishop f1? Is that a defensive resource just to remove that bishop?
Aha. Bishop f1, and then if hg, then again f takes g3. Maybe he's looking for the killer blow there. Maybe just bishop f5, bishop e4.
On
And
the
he's got
board.
rook a3.
Wow, but not really. Rook takes d3, h3 should win the
Takes
game.
c3. Great call, Peter. Rook takes d3 is the critical move. If you start with h3, that is inaccurate. Why? Maybe because it allows bishop f1, that old idea that we had mentioned previously.
Exactly. And
Rook
look at
takes
this.
bishop.
Fabi can hardly hold himself back. Yeah, he feels that this rook takes d3, h3, but he's posing. He has enough time. You should never rush if your opponent is down to his last seconds and you have a better position. Make sure that you find the right move. Wow, this is a very big moment for Fabi. If he finds rook takes d3, h3 idea, I don't see white ever surviving this.
Especially in light of what happened in the first game. That was a cautionary tale of how important it is to take that extra minute, double check your calculation. Fabi could have won that game and put Mustafa to bed, but instead, the Turkish Grandmaster pulled out a miracle draw, and now Fabi once again laying down the wood. Rook takes d3 and h3 will win the game.
And I feel like he's about to make it. Look at Fabi.
He's,
I'm
as you
I'm
said,
sensing,
holding himself
yes.
back.
Exactly. Yeah, I have played with him enough, and I have seen him that in such moments, I really feel like rook d3 is coming.
And I feel like Mustafa sees it. It's one of the worst feelings in chess. You see the winning move for your opponent, and you're just waiting in agony as the seconds tick painfully by. Rook takes bishop, and then h3 will pose insurmountable problems to white's king. Is there even a way to stave off checkmate, or is it just game over on the spot after h3? And he's done it.
Of course, he has done it.
h3. 39 seconds now for Mustafa to figure out some miraculous way to extend this game, but I don't see anything. Even if he had an hour on the clock, I don't think he would have been able to survive.
Yeah, it's basically just impossible. I mean, if the h-file opens up, then any move like f3 just prolongs the battle, but this white king will not be able to escape.
16 seconds, and f3, just trying to desperately open up a pathway for white's king. That's an inventive defensive move, and it is going to prolong the game.
Yes, I mean, basically, white will give up all the pawns. He has something like h takes g2, king f2, g takes f3, and you should never touch those pawns. Just try to hide with your king behind them. But black is collecting way too much material. And the plan that you mentioned, eventually, at some point, this bishop from e6 will land on e4 via f5, e4. Even the end games should be winning. Yes, sometimes maybe then black will just suddenly start trading the queens and win the end game.
And there's a tactical idea there as well, as king f2, g takes f3 will appear on the board, which is queen h2. You don't want to play queen h2 immediately because of rook g1, Peter, but after g takes f3, queen h2 is a threat because rook g1 could be met with queen takes g1, and then the rook drives into h1. Black promotes a pawn. There's just too many directions, too many threats. I'm expecting this to be over within a couple of moves.
Yes, I mean, basically this means that after gfc, I have to play rook g1 in order to be able to play rook dd1. Yeah, rook g1 on the board. But you can switch to something like queen g6, hitting towards queen c2 square, and then rook h1, and then trading that rook on g1. I agree that this will be over pretty soon.
Great call. Queen g6, using all sides of the board here, paving the way for rook h1. What about queen h1? That would be a blunder due to queen takes f3. So don't want to get over eager here. And I don't think you want to go bishop f5 yet, because the white rook will deploy down the a file and create sudden counterplay against black's king.
Yes, exactly. I mean, this queen g6 is a very clean way, yeah, because you hit the rook, you make sure that white has to stay passive with something like rook d2, then you go rook h1, challenge the rook on g1. Will white be able to play queen takes f3? That's the only question.
Fabi is just an executioner in this game. He's playing one perfect move after another. He seems a lot calmer than he was in the classical games. And 6 minutes on the clock is perhaps the most depressing thing for Yilmaz. Fabi has all the time in the world to figure out anything that he throws at him.
Yeah, and there are even some ideas like rook d2, rook h1, queen takes f3, and the rook falls back to h5 and threatens rook f5, also combined with bishop g4. I mean, once white takes the f3 pawn, his king will be way too vulnerable.
That's a great point, and that is why rook h1 is the top move here. You actually want to induce the move queen takes f3. And there is even... Oh no, queen b1 is a little too much, but I'm trying to find the fanciest way to blunder the game away for black, as I usually do.
Playing for the galleries.
Indeed. A couple of results, Peter. Jobava, he lost that game. He was struggling. He lost that game with white to Jaime Santos Latasa. And Rauf Mamedov gets crushed in that complicated middle game by the motivated Jan Nepomniachtchi. Wow. 2 losses, 2 big blows with the white pieces, and Timur Rajabov is on the verge of getting knocked out of the World Cup by his lower-rated opponent.
Yes, well, I mean, the position looked very much out of control, and I mentioned it was not Rajabov's position from the white side, just very similar feeling I had yesterday when we covered the Juvenjun game, that it was not her position. Those kind of double pawns, it's not what she believes in. And, well, now Rajabov in a very tough spot with trying to win on demand with the black pieces.
Man, oh man. And for Rauf Mamedov, an even more difficult task, as he is the inferior rapid player. And there we watch Fabiano Caruana ponder perhaps the last critical moment in this game. The winning move is rook to h1. You lure white into taking on f3. Then you might want to throw in bishop g4, and ultimately the rook swings back to f5 with devastating threats against white's king. I think he'll find it. It's very concrete.
Yeah, it's very direct, very much also what the position demands, yeah, because white set up somehow crazy kind of defense, but you feel like this defense cannot hold on forever, and if you eliminate the defender, also black's rook on h8 otherwise cannot participate in the game, yeah, and you really want to make good use of that rook.
Indeed. Still looks like a draw, by the way, in Jules Moussard's game against Wesley So. I'm keeping an eye on all the other games. And Bardia Daneshvar also holds great winning chances against Salim Salih. Rook h5 straight away by Fabiano Caruana.
Okay, well, it's the rook h1 looked like the knockout punch. Rook h5 is a very nice move. And basically signaling, please find the move. And queen f6 played.
Ooh, nice move by Yilmaz, though. And does Fabi consider trading?
Well, even trading is possible, but we don't want to trade at the moment. Something like queen e4, threatening rook takes e5, and then we get access to the e3 pawn. Probably we anyway have king d7 safety net for our king, but we have to watch out for some rook a2, rook a8, queen d8 checkmate.
And it's so important that black has the c2 square, because after queen e4, rook a2, first of all, you have to stay alert and play king d7. But white is unable to play rook a8 unless that move comes with a check, because queen c2 opens up an obvious mating attack. But where is the killer blow going to come from after queen e4? Is it rook takes e5? Is it some sort of positional move? Or is it the fact that white just doesn't have a move here?
Yeah, that's the problem. I mean, what do you do with white? Maybe queen f4 will be played. No, b5?
e5.
Okay, but b5
okay,
does nothing.
c5. c5 simply, yeah?
Yeah.
Looks dead lost for white at this point. Rook a2 is the only active idea, but it is easily neutralized by king d7. Fabi's down to 3 minutes. If he was down to 15 seconds, then we would have been talking. But that extra time that he built up in the first part of the game, I think this is where he's really reaping the reward of that.
Yeah, this gives you such a good safety net, yeah, because you can handle your nerves. Yeah, there is simply no reason why you have to rush with any of your decisions. And to make sure, because the position is still very tricky, as you highlighted, that black always has to watch out for rook a2, black has to play the move king d7, and then unfortunately for white, nothing moves. That's the big problem.
Yeah, these pawns are just keeping white's pieces completely at bay. Once this game concludes, we will check into the women's section where Teodora Inyats is on the cusp of upsetting Alexander Kostenyuk in their first rapid game. But we've invested too much time into this game to not observe its conclusion. 2 minutes now for Fabiano Caruana. And will we see a little bit of nervousness, a bit of anxiety as he drops below 2 minutes on the clock?
Well, I think that the one situation Fabi is faced with, that how on earth is this game not over yet? It looked like it's going to be checkmate. He takes C takes B5, showing good nerves. Mustafa goes G4.
Whoa. Throwing all his pawns. Just throwing the kitchen sink at black, trying to unsettle the coordination of his pieces. The idea, I think, is to wait for bishop takes G4. And in some positions, I don't know, to attack the D5 pawn, to play E6. Just searching desperately for tactical counterplay is Mustafa Yilmaz. Rook H3.
Yeah, well, actually, there is a big trick. Yeah, bishop takes G4, Rook A2, King D7, Queen D6 check. Suddenly the queen gets access to the D6 square.
What an idea. So the idea is to open up the 6th rank, and Fabi, for that reason, has to keep this bishop pinned on E6.
Yes, don't move that bishop.
1 minute for the American Grandmaster. Will he find
G4.
Rook H3?
G4 was a stunning resource. I mean, especially with little time on the clock. Fabi's done to a minute. This is getting dramatic.
Oh my goodness. And obviously the F3 pawn is also hanging. So that is another reason why you want to put the rook on H3. 50 seconds. We see his clock there. Fabiano Caruana has to make a move. And was he about to take queen takes G4, which does keep a winning advantage, but is a little bit more complicated?
Yeah, I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, queen takes G4, because then he even has the chance of trading queens just in case. Yeah, because he's down to 30 seconds. He's a little bit panicking.
And anyway, how the game finishes, kudos to Mustafa Yilmaz. He has somehow generated counterplay that has caused Fabiano Caruana to burn all of his remaining time, and he does play queen takes G4. And rook A2, king D7 is very likely. Then rook A8. And will you be able to force the queens off the board? But Peter, if you lose the F3 pawn, then the game becomes a lot more complicated.
Yeah, because you might lose the G2 pawn as well. Okay, Fabi after C takes B5, standing very nicely on the queen side, probably should be enough. But has to be played.
Gotta try rook A8, and he plays it. Okay, now queen G5 apparently is the cold-blooded winning move. White is threatening checkmate in 2 with queen D8 and queen D6.
But I think it's so much more human to give queen H4 check, yeah, because it's more forcing, but it's less effective. But I think it's good enough. I mean, queen H4 looks to be professional enough.
And he's done it, and the queens are off, and the F3 pawn has been eliminated, and the G2 pawn is coming next. Because if you try to cling to that pawn with bishop H3, Peter, would you advise that, or do you think that's too greedy?
Too greedy, too greedy. I feel like opening up something, and Fabi goes for D4.
Oh, but now rook takes G2 apparently is possible. Bishop D5, king G3 sliding in and attacking, counterattacking black's rook. This is not over.
This is not over. Okay, but it looks nevertheless anyway good.
Yes. E4, I think, is the more human move, but then black's got too many passed pawns on the queen side.
And the bishop on E6 opened up its diagonal. Yeah, the range it can be placed on C4. Yeah, E4 played.
And Fabi can just start pushing his queenside pawns. The G2 pawn has done its job. Now the battle transitions to the other side of the board, and the bishop on E6 is such a monster.
Yeah, and also the B7 pawn is very important, because black can also start advancing his king. but Fabi goes D3. This is surprising. I thought like B4, king C6, king B5, B3. These kind of constructions look very natural.
You can, of course, put the bishop on C4. Anish Giri has defeated Nijat Abasov, by the way, in a completely drawn position to take the first rapid game. A big blow to the local Azeri. But we stay on this game. Fabiano Caruana has to keep playing accurately. I think he will start pushing his b-pawn right about now.
Yes, it's the time. But he goes king c6. Okay, he activates the king. He wants to make sure that bishop c4 will be protected. Yeah, because bishop c4 protects the f7 pawn, protects the d3 pawn. It's protected by the b5 pawn. Those are the moves that you want to make with few seconds on the clock.
Peter Spidler wins his game with black. Exquisite effort against Jordan Van Forest. And what now? Do we play b4? Does he keep pushing his king up to the center? b4. He's winning. This is hopeless.
Yes.
This is hopeless.
And the rook on h3 also does a great job cutting off white's king, so white is not able to get king e3, king d4, so that's also very important. Rook b8 will be played.
And b6 here, just keeping all of the pawns alive. And the position starts to play itself. That's the problem. Black's moves are so easy.
Yeah, this double pawns. I mean, without the pawn on b6 or before b7, then suddenly white would have millions of checks. Black's king would have not felt comfortable, but thanks to this pawn, the king has beautiful shelter there.
Super impressive how Fabi has kept his nerves even as he's dropped to the last seconds on his clock. Now, he is going to lose the b6 pawn, but the combined forces of the b and d pawns should end the game. I would play b3, rook cb7, last chance for Yilmaz. He has been so resilient, squeezing out every final chance, and the game's still not quite over. Fabi's got to find 3 or 4 accurate moves, and he's down to 10 seconds.
Yeah, he has to go for it.
b3.
Yes, b3, and then hide with the king. King before king c3, and then get into d2 or b2. Just hide from the checks.
And he's doing just that. The king will go to c3. And it will go either to the left or to the right. And whichever way he goes, the other pawn should be the game-winning piece.
Yes.
Still trying. Maybe, Peter, you should go rook g8 and try to check laterally after shepherding the king to d2.
Yeah, but probably Fabi will go king b2. It's maybe, okay, he goes king d2.
Rook g8, I think, has to be tried, setting a little
then
trap.
Rook h2. Then rook h2, protecting the second rank.
Cold-blooded prophylactic. And then white basically has to go back to b8.
And then we have king e2, d2, rook f2 check. Yeah, that's it.
Indeed. The last hurdle, king e2, is unstoppable. Actually, b2 is not a threat because of rook b8. Or maybe it is.
King f3, still fighting.
Vahap Sanal has defeated Anton Korobov, another upset result. Anton will have to win with white. There's b2. Rook b8, king d1. And that rook on h2 is perfectly placed.
Yeah, what a tense game. Unbelievable.
The last gasps of Mustafa Yilmaz, who has defended like a hero, but it's just not enough. Too many pawns, too many passers, too much activity. And I think the winning move here, what is it? Is it king c1?
Well, I guess even king c3 is tempting, and then rook, rook c6, bishop c4, just blocking that check.
King c2. And rook c6 check, still fighting. Is the Turkish Grandmaster trying to force the king to step in front of the pawn, which will buy white a tempo